Comrades, what if I told you that the freedom you celebrate, the independence you believe you possess, the choices you think are yours are nothing more than shadows cast on the walls of a prison you were never meant to see? What if the very structure of society has been engineered so that you mistake obedience for liberty, exploitation for opportunity, and domination for order? Today, we tear through that illusion. For too long, the world has been paralyzed by a lie, the lie that we are free because we can choose between masters, free because we may struggle for wages, free because we may sell our labor to survive. But a freedom that begins with hunger and ends in exhaustion is not freedom, it is coercion masquerading as choice. Look around you. Behind the glittering facade of prosperity stands a system that does not liberate, it disciplines. It shapes your consciousness long before you are old enough to question it. From your earliest years, you are conditioned to believe that your value is measured by your productivity, your worth by your profitability, your destiny by your willingness to conform to the demands of employers, owners, and institutions that do not know your name but extract your life force all the same. This is not accident. This is design. The ruling class, those who own the land, the factories, the technologies, the banks, understand something the rest of society is never taught. True power is not maintained by force, but by shaping what people believe is normal, and so they construct a world in which inequality appears natural, wealth seems deserved, and poverty is blamed on the poor. They tell you that competition is human nature while they unite across borders to secure profits. They tell you to work harder while the wealth you create flows upward like a river feeding a golden ocean you will never touch. They tell you that the market is free while every aspect of your life is chained to its demands. This is the illusion of freedom. It is the freedom of the bird allowed to fly only inside a cage. The freedom of the worker free to choose any employer so long as they accept exploitation as the price of survival. The freedom of the citizen free to vote for leaders, none of whom can challenge the economic powers that actually rule. But history has never moved forward by accepting illusions. It advances when they are shattered. Workers, oppressed people, those standing at the margins of society, you are not powerless. You are the engines of production, the creators of wealth, the hands that build cities, harvest fields, operate machines, write code, care for the sick, raise the young, and keep the world alive. Without you, there is nothing. Without you, the system collapses in an instant. Yet you have been taught to doubt yourselves and worship those who profit from your labor. You are told the wealthy are geniuses, innovators, job creators. But strip away the propaganda, and what remains? A class that owns but does not produce. A class that profits but does not labor. A class that extracts without contributing. They do not stand above you, they stand on top of you. And so long as you believe the illusion that the system is unchangeable, it will remain so. So long as you believe that your suffering is personal and not structural, the chains will tighten. So long as you believe that freedom can be granted from above rather than seized from below, you will remain subjects, not agents. But the moment you recognize that you share the same struggle, the same exploitation, the same wounds carved by the same machinery, you become dangerous. You become unified. You become a class awakened. And that is why society tries so violently to keep you divided by nationality, by race, by religion, by language, by artificial hierarchies designed to keep you isolated. For the rulers know that the unity of the oppressed is the death of exploitation. Comrades, the world does not change itself. The chains of illusion will not break on their own. The system that profits from your submission will not one day wake with a conscience. If justice is to be won, it must be taken through organization, through solidarity, through the forging of a movement powerful enough to overturn the structures that have held humanity captive for generations. The task before us is clear: to expose the mechanisms of control, to unmask the ideology that disguises inequality as destiny, to reclaim the power that rightfully belongs to those who labor, not those who own, to build a society in which freedom is not an illusion but a lived reality, a society where human dignity is not a commodity, where labor enriches the worker, not the exploiter, where the wealth of the world belongs to those who create it. You were never meant to live bent beneath the weight of another's prosperity. You were not born to be managed, disciplined, or controlled. You are the authors of history, its engines and its heartbeat. Rise, then, not as isolated individuals, but as a class conscious of its power. Organize not for reform, but for transformation. Refuse the illusion. Demand the real. Seize the freedom that has always been denied to you. The time has come to wake from the dream constructed for you. The world is waiting. The chains are cracking. The future demands your courage. Comrades, break the illusion. Break the silence. Break the system. The most dangerous lie ever taught to the modern worker is the belief that they are free. Society repeats this myth with religious devotion. You are free because you can work, free because you can vote, free because you can choose your path. Yet when we examine the structure of the world, not through illusion but through material reality, this so-called freedom reveals itself as an elaborate facade, one built to conceal the chains that bind the working class to an order not of their making. Under capitalism, freedom is reduced to a market transaction. You are considered free because you may sell your labor to any employer you wish. But what kind of freedom is this, when the refusal to sell your labor leads to destitution? This is not liberation, it is coercion masked as choice. The worker is free only in the sense that they are not legally owned, yet their survival is wholly dependent on submitting themselves daily to the demands of those who control the means of life. Real freedom is impossible in a world where one class owns the factories, land, resources, machines, technologies and institutions, while the vast majority must beg for access to them through wage labor. When the necessities of life are monopolized by a minority, the majority is not free. It is trapped. It can only move within the boundaries that the ruling class permits. The workers' so-called autonomy evaporates the moment they step into the workplace. There, time itself is no longer theirs. The hours of their life, hours they will never regain, are sold piece by piece, transformed into profit for someone else. Every movement, every action, every breath taken within those walls becomes subject to managerial command. And yet society dares to label this subordination freedom. The illusion functions because it has been normalized. People are trained from childhood to believe that working under capital is a natural condition, an unchangeable reality. They are taught to worship labor not as human creativity, but as sacrifice to the interests of the owners. Schools, media, and political institutions repeat the narrative that if one works hard enough, one will rise. But this fantasy collapses before the simplest observation. The vast wealth of the world accumulates in the hands of those who do not labor, while those who do labor struggle merely to survive. What kind of freedom is it when the majority must sell their strength, their intellect, their very bodies in order to live, while a minority accumulates unimaginable wealth without working a single day? The structure of the system exposes its true nature. One class profits, the other produces. One commands, the other obeys. One enjoys freedom, the other endures discipline disguised as opportunity. Even outside the workplace, the workers' freedom is diminished. Their time is consumed by exhaustion, their choices determined by income, their emotions shaped by insecurity. Debt chains them. Rising prices pressure them. Political systems ignore them. They are told they are free citizens, yet the decisions that shape their lives, economic policies, corporate strategies, market shifts are made without their input, often against their interests. Under capitalism, the worker is free in the same way a fish is free inside a glass bowl. Able to move, but only within boundaries they cannot cross. Able to swim, but without control over the environment that dictates their survival. The system praises individual liberty while denying the material conditions necessary to exercise it. True freedom would require control over the resources that sustain life, influence over the decisions that govern society, and power over the fruits of one's own labor. Capitalism allows none of this. Instead, it offers a narrow impersonation of freedom. Freedom to consume, freedom to choose between brands, freedom to select which capitalist will profit from your labor. These are not the freedoms of a liberated human being. They are the freedoms of a market subject, a unit of production, a servant disguised as a citizen. But illusions do not endure forever. When workers recognize that the freedom sold to them is counterfeit, when they understand that the system depends on their submission, something powerful awakens within them. They begin to see that true freedom is collective, not individual, material, not symbolic, rooted in shared ownership, not private accumulation. Freedom will never be gifted from above by those who profit from unfreedom. It must be claimed from below by those who labor, those who produce, those whose lives have been reduced to commodities. Only when the structures of exploitation are dismantled can freedom cease to be an illusion and become a living reality. Power operates through ideology, not just force expanded, 700 words. When we look at the structure of society, many imagine power as something exercised through direct force. Armies, police, prisons, the visible machinery of coercion. But this is only the most crude, primitive form of domination. Modern authority understands something far more effective. The most enduring power is not that which chains the body, but that which shapes the mind. A people who believe they are free, even while living under domination, are far easier to govern than a people who know they are oppressed. Force can subdue, but ideology convinces. Ideology is the subtle, pervasive, invisible instrument through which the ruling class secures obedience without ever needing to raise a weapon. It does not shout, it whispers. It does not demand, it guides. It does not break resistance, it prevents resistance from ever forming. It is the quiet architect of consent. The function of ideology is simple yet extraordinarily effective: to transform the interests of the ruling class into the common sense of the entire society. Its aim is to make inequality appear natural, exploitation appear inevitable, and the existing social order appear eternal. When a society reaches this stage, the oppressed no longer question the structure of their oppression, they accept it as the unchangeable reality of life. From the earliest moments of childhood, individuals are surrounded by institutions designed to mold their consciousness. Schools teach obedience, punctuality, hierarchy, and competition long before they teach genuine critical thought. Children are told to prepare for a future in which they must serve the needs of employers, not their own human potential. They learn that authority must be respected, rules must be followed, and labor must be disciplined. This is not education, it is preparation for subordination. The media continues this work, serving as the mouthpiece of the dominant class. Newspapers, television, digital platforms, each of these reinforces the narrative that the system is fair, that the wealthy are brilliant innovators, that the poor are responsible for their own poverty, that markets are neutral and natural. Through repetition, these ideas seep into everyday thinking, until they are no longer recognized as ideology at all. They become simple facts, though they are nothing more than the interests of the powerful dressed as universal truth. Religion, too, has often functioned as an ideological instrument, encouraging acceptance, sacrifice, humility, and the promise of rewards in another life. Instead of empowering individuals to transform their conditions, it teaches them to endure suffering with patience, as if the injustices of the present world were part of some divine plan. Whether physical chains or spiritual ones, the goal is the same: to prevent the oppressed from challenging the structure that benefits the elite. Even the laws and political institutions reinforce ideology. They present themselves as neutral arbiters of justice, but they reflect the economic interests of those who control society. Property laws defend the wealth of those who already possess it. Labor laws regulate the worker but not the owner. Taxation policies burden those who produce but spare those who merely accumulate. Yet people are taught to view these institutions as sacred, objective, and above criticism. To question them is portrayed as irrational, dangerous, or unpatriotic. Thus, ideology does what force alone cannot. It convinces the exploited to participate in their own exploitation. A worker who believes that the system rewards effort will blame themselves, not their employer, when they struggle. A citizen who believes the nation is free will defend the very institutions that restrict their freedom. A society that internalizes the values of capital will treat profit as virtue and poverty as failure. When people believe the ideas of their oppressors, they become the guardians of their own chains. But ideology is not invincible. It cracks the moment people begin to examine their own conditions. When workers compare their labor with their wages, when consumers question why their needs are subordinated to profit, when oppressed groups recognize their shared struggle, ideology begins to lose its power. Awareness is dangerous to the ruling class because it transforms isolated dissatisfaction into collective consciousness. This is why the powerful fear critical thinking, dissent, and education rooted in truth rather than obedience. They know that once ideology is exposed for what it is, a tool of domination, the entire structure of society becomes open to transformation. A population that understands how power operates will no longer accept the narratives handed down to them. They will demand a world built on justice, not illusion. Thus, the struggle for liberation is not only fought on the picket line, in the workplace, or in the streets, it is also fought in the mind. To break the grip of ideology is to reclaim the ability to see the world as it truly is, not as the rulers wish it to appear. Once that understanding spreads, force becomes powerless, and genuine freedom becomes possible. The working class creates all wealth expanded, 700 words. In every era of human history, from the earliest forms of communal labor to the towering industrial systems of the modern age, one truth has remained constant. All wealth is born from human labor. Yet in the society we inhabit today, this most obvious truth is concealed beneath layers of ideology, profit, and propaganda. The world is built by the many, but owned by the few. Those who labor create everything, yet possess almost nothing. Those who own contribute nothing, yet command everything. The working class, whether in fields, factories, offices, hospitals, or digital spaces, stands at the foundation of all economic life. It is their hands that shape the raw materials of the earth into usable products. Their minds that design, organize, and operate the machinery of modern production. Their energy that keeps cities alive, transports goods, maintains infrastructure, and provides the essential services without which society would collapse in an instant. Remove workers for a single week, and the world stops. Remove the owners for a year, and not a single machine would halt. But the ruling class has always attempted to disguise its parasitic dependence on labor. It portrays itself as the source of innovation, risk, leadership, and progress. These claims crumble under scrutiny. Innovation often comes from the collective efforts of engineers, scientists, and skilled workers, yet the owners claim the credit because they own the patents. Risk is borne not by capitalists, but by workers whose livelihoods depend on wages. Leadership is nothing more than the coordination of labor performed from a distance by those who rarely understand the work itself. Progress is the result of human creativity, not the private accumulation of wealth. To understand how the working class creates all wealth, we must examine the process of production itself. Raw materials have no value until labor acts upon them. A tree is not a table until a carpenter shapes it. Iron is not machinery until a worker forges it. Knowledge is not technology until programmers and engineers transform it into functioning systems. The value of a product emerges not from ownership, but from the labor invested within it. Every object in society bears the imprint of countless workers whose contributions are invisible yet essential. However, under capitalism, those who create wealth do not own it. The fruits of their labor are taken from them the moment they are produced. A worker spends 8, 10, or 12 hours generating value, but receives in return only a fraction of what they produce. The rest becomes the profit of the employer. That profit is nothing more than unpaid labor, the portion of the worker's effort that they never see, yet that enriches someone else. Entire fortunes are built upon this theft, accumulated by those who have mastered the art of profiting from the labor of others while contributing nothing themselves. This extraction of unpaid labor is hidden behind the seemingly simple transaction of wages. Workers are paid not for the value they create, but for the minimum required to keep them returning to work. This arrangement disguises exploitation as fairness, as if both sides exchanged equivalents. Yet the inequality is glaring. One class lives in abundance without producing, while the other produces endlessly without receiving abundance. Even more insidiously, the ruling class attempts to divide the working class into fragments, skilled and unskilled, manual and intellectual, domestic and foreign, traditional and gig-based. But these divisions are illusions. Whether a person swings a hammer or operates software, heals the sick or builds machines, drives a truck or programs a robot, they belong to the same class, those who survive only by selling their labor. Their exploitation may take different forms, but the essence remains identical. The modern world, with its skyscrapers, digital networks, transportation systems, communication technologies, agricultural fields, and industrial complexes, is the collective creation of billions of workers across generations. Their labor has produced every advancement humanity has enjoyed. Yet they remain alienated from the wealth they create, as if the world they build does not belong to them. The purpose of recognizing that the working class creates all wealth is not merely analytical, it is revolutionary. When workers understand that society stands upon their shoulders, they awaken to their power. They see that they are not subordinate to the owners are dependent on them. They see that they are not expendable, they are the heartbeat of civilization. They see that they do not have to beg for rights, they can claim them. They see that the wealth of the world should belong not to those who hold stock certificates, but to those whose labor makes life possible. When the working class recognizes itself as the true creator of wealth, it becomes more than a class, it becomes a force capable of transforming society from one built on exploitation to one built on justice. And it is this recognition, this awakening, that the ruling class fears above all else. Division is a weapon used against the oppressed expanded, 700 words. Throughout history, no tool has served the ruling class more effectively than division. While force can crush a rebellion and ideology can shape consciousness, division prevents rebellion from arising at all. It isolates individuals from one another, turns potential allies into rivals, and transforms a united force into scattered, powerless fragments. The oppressed are many, the oppressors are few. Thus, the only way a minority can continue ruling over the majority is by ensuring that the majority never recognizes its own collective strength. Division is not accidental, it is engineered. It is not a natural feature of human life, it is a deliberate strategy, refined across generations, to keep the exploited from rising against those who exploit them. The ruling class understands that its power does not come from its intelligence or its moral superiority, it comes from its ability to prevent the working class from uniting. Every separation, whether based on nationality, race, religion, language, gender, caste, profession, or artificial hierarchies within workplaces, serves the same purpose: to pit the oppressed against one another so they never turn against their true oppressor. The divisions may appear distinct, but beneath them lies one common function: the maintenance of domination. Consider how the workplace is structured. Workers are divided by skill level, department, seniority, contract type, and even physical location. These divisions justify unequal pay, create competition, and prevent the workforce from acting as a unified whole. One group fears losing privileges, another resents those who possess them. Yet both groups share the same exploitation, selling their labor to those who profit from it. The differences are superficial. The common condition is fundamental. Beyond the workplace, society is carved into categories designed to weaken solidarity. National borders convince workers that foreign laborers are their enemies, even though both groups are exploited by the same global system. Racial ideology teaches one section of the oppressed to distrust another, while the ruling class benefits from both. Religious differences are manipulated so that faith becomes a barrier rather than a bridge. Gender is used to justify unequal treatment and to divide workers into spheres of labor that can be exploited in different ways. Each division is accompanied by a story crafted by those in power that justifies the separation. They are not like you. They threaten your jobs. They undermine your values. They take what you deserve. These narratives sow mistrust, competition, and hostility. They transform the collective struggle of the working class into a series of isolated battles in which each group fights not against oppression, but against other victims of the same oppression. The genius of division is that it makes the oppressed believe they are each other's problem. While the wealthy consolidate their power across nations, industries, and institutions, workers are taught to see one another as the threat. Thus, the real enemy, the system that exploits all, remains untouched, strengthened by the chaos it creates. But division does more than weaken resistance, it shapes consciousness. When people identify more strongly with narrow categories than with their shared class position, they lose awareness of their true collective power. They defend privileges that do not liberate them, and they fight to maintain distinctions that offer no real advantage. This psychological fragmentation ensures that the oppressed do not recognize themselves as a unified force capable of challenging the structures that dominate them. Yet all divisions, no matter how deeply rooted, crumble when exposed to the reality of exploitation. A worker in one country has more in common with a worker in another than with the wealthy elite in their own nation. A laborer of one race shares the same struggle as a laborer of another, regardless of the prejudices imposed upon them. A woman performing underpaid labor experiences the same systemic extraction as a man who faces exploitation through different mechanisms. Beneath every difference lies a shared condition, the necessity to sell labor to survive, and the denial of control over the wealth they create. When workers recognize this shared condition, division loses its power. Solidarity emerges not as a moral sentiment but as a material necessity, a force born from the understanding that only unity can challenge oppression. A united working class is not merely stronger, it is unstoppable. It possesses the numbers, the labor power, and the collective intelligence to transform society from the ground up. This is precisely why the ruling class fears unity above all else. They can withstand protests, strikes, and revolts, but they cannot survive a global, unified working class conscious of its strength. And so they invest immense energy into maintaining divisions, for unity threatens the very foundation of exploitation. To dismantle these divisions is not simply a political task, it is the first act of liberation. It requires exposing every artificial barrier, challenging every narrative that pits worker against worker, and forging bonds of solidarity across all the lines drawn by those in power. Only then can the oppressed recognize themselves as one class with a common struggle and a common destiny. Liberation requires collective organization and revolutionary change, expanded 700 words. Throughout history, the oppressed have always possessed the numerical strength, the creative energy, and the productive power necessary to transform society. Yet these immense forces remain dormant when individuals stand alone, fragmented, isolated by the very system that exploits them. Liberation has never been achieved through individual heroism or personal ambition. It emerges only when the masses recognize their shared condition, unite around their common interests, and organize themselves into a conscious force capable of reshaping the world. Without collective organization, there can be anger but no strategy, suffering but no transformation, desire for freedom but no power to secure it. The ruling class understands this truth well. They fear not the individual dissenter, no matter how bold, but the organized masses who move with coordinated purpose. For this reason, every structure of society encourages individualism, competition, and isolation. People are taught to see themselves not as members of a collective class, but as solitary units struggling for personal survival within a hostile economic order. Workers must fight for promotions, students must compete for limited opportunities, families must contend for basic necessities. This fragmentation prevents the development of true solidarity and keeps the oppressed running in place, exhausted but unchanged. The first step toward liberation, therefore, is the awakening of class consciousness, the realization that individual struggles are merely expressions of a deeper, systemic exploitation. When people recognize that their suffering is shared, that their oppression is not a personal failure but a structural condition, they begin to search for collective solutions. This shift in consciousness transforms isolated grievances into a unified demand for justice. The oppressed cease to blame themselves for the consequences of a system that was built to exploit them. Yet consciousness alone is insufficient. Even when people understand their shared oppression, the ruling class retains control unless the oppressed organize into disciplined, strategic, and determined movements. Power must be met with power organized, collective, intentional. The ruling class possesses institutions, wealth, influence, and the mechanisms of enforcement. The oppressed possess their numbers, their labor, and their capacity for unity. When these forces are coordinated, the balance of power shifts. Collective organization creates what isolated individuals cannot: structure, strategy, continuity, and strength. It builds networks of support where the vulnerable find protection. It transforms despair into action and anger into strategy. It provides a framework through which the working class can articulate its demands and enforce them with the weight of millions. Strikes, mass mobilizations, political movements, and revolutionary councils, these are not spontaneous outbursts, but the structured expression of collective power. Without organization, the ruling class continues to rule. With organization, the foundation of their power begins to crack. But organization alone does not guarantee liberation. The system of exploitation is not a mere flaw in the social fabric, it is the fabric itself. It cannot be reformed into justice. It must be replaced. The institutions that govern society today, economic, political, legal, cultural, are built to protect private ownership, maintain hierarchy, and ensure the continued extraction of labor. Minor reforms may ease suffering temporarily, but they leave the core of the system untouched. The oppressed must therefore aim not to adjust the existing order, but to abolish and replace it with a society rooted in equality, collective ownership, and true democratic control. Revolutionary change is not simply an act of destruction, it is an act of creation. It dismantles the mechanisms of exploitation and replaces them with structures that reflect the needs of the many, not the privileges of the few. It is the moment when the working class takes control of the means of life, land, factories, technology, infrastructure, and uses them to serve humanity rather than profit. It is the point at which labor no longer enriches owners, but enriches the laborers themselves. It is the birth of a society where freedom is not an illusion but a material reality. Revolution requires courage, discipline, and unity. It demands that the oppressed overcome the divisions imposed upon them, reject the comforting myths of gradual reform, and recognize that liberation will never be granted voluntarily by those who benefit from oppression. History shows that every advance in human freedom has come only when the exploited have risen, organized, and demanded their rights with the force of collective action. The future does not belong to the passive. It belongs to those who understand that liberation is not a gift but a conquest. When the working class organizes across lines of race, nationality, gender, and industry, when it recognizes itself as the universal class capable of transforming society, then the old world of exploitation will crumble, and a new world will grow in its place. Liberation is not a dream, it is a task, and it can only be fulfilled by the collective power of the oppressed rising in revolutionary solidarity. Comrades, we stand at the crossroads of history, where the forces that have long concealed themselves behind the facade of freedom can no longer mask their true nature. Throughout this discourse, one truth has echoed relentlessly. Society, as it is constructed today, is not an arena of liberation but a battlefield of concealed domination. What has been presented to you as choice is often coercion wrapped in comforting language. What has been offered as opportunity is merely exploitation wearing the mask of progress. The illusion of freedom has been the most effective chain, silently binding the many for the benefit of the few. We have exposed the mechanism of this illusion, how power does not rely solely on brute strength but infiltrates the mind, shaping consciousness until oppression seems natural and inequality seems inevitable. Through ideology, the ruling forces weaponize belief, turn education into indoctrination, and mold public opinion into an instrument of their continued control. This ideological fog is not harmless. It is the invisible architecture of domination itself. Yet amid this fog, one force remains constant and undeniable: the creative power of the working class. Every factory, every field, every city skyline owes its existence to the hands and minds of laboring people. Wealth does not fall from the heavens, nor does it spring from the genius of solitary elites. It is produced collectively, extracted from the effort of the many, and hoarded by the few. To recognize this is to recognize both an injustice and a power, the power of those who create the world to reshape it. But power, if fragmented, becomes weakness. Division has been the oldest and most sophisticated weapon wielded against the oppressed. We have seen how lines of race, religion, nationality and status are drawn not to reflect human difference, but to manufacture human conflict. Those who rule understand that a divided class is a defeated class. They rely on suspicion, fear and competition to keep the exploited from turning their gaze upward toward the true architects of their suffering. The strategy is simple. Keep the masses fighting among themselves, and they will never challenge the structure that exploits them. Therefore, liberation cannot be an individual pursuit, nor can it be achieved through isolated acts of resistance. Real freedom emerges only when people unite in conscious, organized struggle. Collective organization is not a slogan, but a necessity. It is the means by which the working class transforms its scattered strength into a force capable of overturning the very foundations of exploitation. Revolutionary change is not the chaos feared by the elites. It is the restoration of human dignity, the reclaiming of stolen value, the reordering of society on principles of justice, equality, and shared prosperity. Let it be known that history does not move on its own. It advances through the will of the people who refuse to accept the world as it is and dare to imagine the world as it should be. Each generation inherits the contradictions of its time, but it also inherits the responsibility to confront them. The chains of illusion that bind society today will not break themselves. They must be shattered by the collective determination of those who understand their true nature. So, I call upon you, not as isolated individuals, but as members of a global class bound by common struggle and common destiny. Rise with clarity, with unity, with purpose. Tear away the ideological veil that has obscured your power. Reject division. Organize with those who share your struggle. And together forge a future where freedom is not a spectacle but a lived reality, where the labor that builds the world also governs it, and where the wealth created by the people serves the people. The illusion has been exposed, the truth stands before you. Now, the question that remains is simple. Will you accept the world as it is, or will you fight for the world that could be?